My blind daughter was sitting quietly on the airplane, holding her white cane. She wasn't moving around. She was just waiting for the flight to take off. Then 2 HOA police stood up. They started teasing her, laughing, saying she was in the wrong seat and that people like her shouldn't fly. One of them waved a fake badge inches from her face, knowing she couldn't see it. My daughter looked scared. She whispered, "I'm blind. Please stop." Passengers froze. A flight attendant hesitated. Phones came out. The fake HOA cops laughed harder. But they had no idea that the blind child they were mocking at 30,000 feet was the daughter of a man who could shut down the entire airline. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from, and please hit subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. My blind daughter was sitting quietly on the airplane. She was already buckled in, the seatbelt snug across her small body. She sat perfectly still, the way she always does in unfamiliar places. Her white cane rested gently across her lap, both hands folded around it like it was part of her. Not a toy, not an accessory, a lifeline. She wasn't moving around. She wasn't talking loudly. She wasn't touching anything she shouldn't. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just waiting for the flight to take off. The cabin was calm, that quiet, heavy calm that fills airplanes right before departure. Overhead bins were closing. Seatbelts clicked. A few people whispered to each other. Someone, a few rows back, laughed softly at a joke on their phone. My daughter tilted her head slightly, listening. She listens more than she looks. She could hear the soft hum of the plane, the air vents, the distant voice of a flight attendant somewhere near the front. She counted sounds the way she always does, mapping the space in her mind so she knows where she is. She squeezed her cane gently. Flying makes her nervous, not because of the plane, but because of people. People stare, people whisper, people forget she's a child. I was a few rows away, watching her closely without making it obvious. I always do that, close enough to reach her quickly. Far enough to let her feel independent. She was doing great. Then 2 HOA police stood up. At first, it was just movement. 2 adults unbuckling their seatbelts when everyone else was settling in. That alone made a few passengers glance up. They stepped into the aisle together, too casually, too confidently. They wore matching polo shirts with cheap-looking patches stitched onto the chest, fake badges clipped to their belts, the kind you can buy online, the kind that look official if you don't know better. They looked at each other and smiled. Not friendly smiles, mocking ones. One of them nudged the other and tilted his head toward my daughter. "She's in the wrong seat," he said loudly. The words carried. Several passengers turned. My daughter's fingers tightened slightly around her cane. The second man laughed. "Yeah," he said, "people like her shouldn't be flying." The sentence hit the cabin like a dropped tray, not loud, heavy. My daughter froze. She couldn't see their faces. She couldn't see the badges, but she could hear the tone. She could feel the attention shift. She lifted her chin a little, her posture stiffening the way it does when she senses danger but doesn't know where it's coming from. One of the men leaned closer, too close. He waved his fake badge inches from her face, knowing she couldn't see it. "See this?" he said, laughing. "Authority." The other one snorted. "Does she even know where she's sitting?" He said. My daughter swallowed. Her breathing changed, shorter, shallower. She turned her face slightly toward the sound, trying to place where they were standing. Her hands tightened around the cane, knuckles pale. She spoke softly, so softly. "I'm blind," she whispered. "Please stop." Her voice trembled, not loud enough to demand attention, not strong enough to stop grown men who thought this was funny. Passengers froze, not because they didn't hear, because they did. A woman across the aisle stopped mid-movement, her hand hovering near her seatbelt. A man a row ahead stared straight forward, jaw clenched. The flight attendant nearby hesitated. You could see it, that moment where training clashes with instinct. Phones quietly came out. No flashes, no dramatic movements, just hands lowering, screens lighting up, cameras pointed discreetly. The fake HOA cops noticed and laughed harder. "She's playing the victim," one of them said. "Figures." "Bet she doesn't even know we're standing here," the other added. They leaned closer again. My daughter flinched. Her shoulders rose slightly, like she was bracing for something she couldn't see coming. Her lips parted, but no sound came out this time. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, small, blind, and trapped in a seat she couldn't leave. I stood up slowly, not rushing, not shouting. I had learned long ago that panic makes things worse, but before I could step fully into the aisle, one of the men spoke again. "You know," he said loudly, "there should be rules about this. Standards." He tapped the fake badge with his finger. "We enforce them." The cabin felt tight now, like the walls had moved closer. The flight attendant finally stepped forward. "Gentlemen," she said cautiously, "please return to your seats." They ignored her. "I'm talking to her," one of them replied. "This concerns us." My daughter's voice came again, barely audible. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. That question did something to the room. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't anger. It was confusion, fear, a child genuinely trying to understand what she had done wrong. Several passengers gasped quietly. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." The men exchanged looks. Then one of them smiled wider. "That depends," he said. I stepped fully into the aisle now. "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Both men turned toward me, annoyed. "Who are you?" one asked. Before I could answer, my daughter turned her head toward my voice. "Daddy," she whispered. The fake HOA cops laughed again. "Oh," one said, "her dad's here." I looked down at my daughter. She was shaking now, her fingers still wrapped around the cane, like it was the only solid thing in the world. Her face was pale, her lips pressed together as she tried not to cry. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said quietly. Then I looked up at the two men. They still didn't know, not even a little. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I did. They didn't know what they had just triggered. They thought this was a joke. They thought this was power. They thought mocking a blind child at 30,000 feet made them untouchable. They had no idea that the blind little girl they were laughing at, the child gripping a white cane in fear, the daughter they thought no one important would defend, was the daughter of a man who could shut down the entire airline, and that the next few minutes were about to change their lives permanently. The laughter echoed, not loud, not wild, cruel. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy. It was sharp and controlled, the kind people use when they believe they're untouchable, the kind that signals power, not happiness. "Can she even see where she's sitting?" one of them joked. The words drifted through the cabin like smoke. A few passengers stiffened. Someone shifted in their seat. A woman 2 rows back sucked in a breath and covered her mouth with her hand. The other man snorted. "Probably doesn't even know we're standing here." They laughed again. My daughter's fingers tightened around her white cane. The cane wasn't just resting in her lap anymore. She gripped it with both hands, knuckles whitening, holding on like it was an anchor, keeping her from drifting into panic. Her breathing changed, shorter, faster, uneven. She tilted her head slightly, trying to locate their voices. She always does that, listens carefully. Maps sound the way sighted people map space. She turned just a little toward the aisle, toward danger she couldn't see but could feel pressing closer. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't scream for help. She just whispered again, her voice barely strong enough to carry past the seat in front. "T of her, please, I didn't do anything." The words were soft, polite, apologetic, the way children speak when they've learned the world punishes them for existing too loudly. The cabin felt heavy. Passengers looked away, not because they agreed, not because they were cruel, but because fear is contagious. One man stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of him, jaw clenched so tightly it trembled. A woman pretended to adjust her bag, even though it was already settled. Someone else closed their eyes like they could disappear into themselves. Silence spread, and the fake HOA cops mistook silence for permission. One of them leaned closer, too close. "So," he said, drawing the word out, "what's your excuse?" My daughter flinched, her shoulders lifted slightly, like she was bracing for impact. She turned her face toward the sound again, trying to understand where he was standing, how close he really was. "I'm blind," she said quietly. "I have a ticket." Her voice shook, but she kept it steady. She always tries to sound reasonable. Like if she explains herself clearly enough, people will stop hurting her. The men laughed again. "That's not what I asked," one of them said. "And tickets don't mean much if you're not fit to fly." The other man nodded, enjoying himself. "There are standards," he said. "Rules." He tapped his fake badge with a fingernail. Click, click, click. The sound was sharp and deliberate. A reminder, authority, real or not, used like a weapon. My daughter's lips parted slightly. She swallowed hard. I can hear fine, she said. I can stay still. She had learned those sentences by heart. I won't move. I won't be a problem. I won't take up space. The cabin air felt thick now, like breathing through fabric. The flight attendant stood a few steps away, frozen. You could see the conflict on her face. Training told her not to escalate. Proceed her. E told her to wait for backup. Instinct told her a child was being hurt. She hesitated just for a moment, and that moment was enough. The men noticed, they always do. People who bully are experts at reading hesitation. See? One of them said loudly, gesturing around the cabin. No one disagrees. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Phones were clearly recording now, held low, angled carefully. No one wanted to draw attention to themselves, but no one wanted this erased either. One man whispered under his breath, "This is sick." The fake HOA cops ignored him. One of them crouched slightly so his face was closer to my daughter's level. "Hey," he said, his voice mocking, "look at me when I'm talking to you." My daughter froze. She couldn't. Her breathing hitched. "I can, T," she whispered. The man laughed. "Oh, right," he said. Forgot. The laughter that followed was worse than the words. It was slow, enjoying itself. A woman across the aisle finally spoke. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The men turned their heads toward her, annoyed. "Mind your business," one snapped. She shrank back immediately, regret flashing across her face. She looked around, searching for support. None came, not because people didn't care, but because fear spreads faster than courage. My daughter shifted slightly in her seat, the smallest movement. The cane slid a few inches across her lap with a soft sound. One of the men noticed instantly. "Don't move," he said sharply. She stopped, completely. Her body went rigid, like she'd been commanded by something bigger than him, by years of learning that stillness is safety. "I'm sorry," she said again, that word, sorry. She hadn't done anything, but she apologized anyway. The man straightened and looked around the cabin, puffing out his chest. "This is what happens when standards slip," he announced. People start thinking they belong everywhere. The words hung there, ugly, unchallenged. A man a few rows back clenched his fists. Another passenger whispered, "This is wrong." Still, no one moved. The flight attendant took a step forward, then stopped. The men turned their attention back to my daughter. "So," one of them said, "what's it going to be?" She tilted her head, confused. "Going to be what?" she asked. He smiled. "That depends," he said slowly. "Do you cooperate?" My daughter's chin trembled. "I'm cooperating," she said softly. "I'm sitting. I'm quiet." The cabin felt like it was shrinking. I stood up then, not suddenly, not angrily. I unbuckled my seatbelt and rose into the aisle, my movements calm and deliberate. The men noticed immediately. "Sit down," one of them snapped without looking at me. I didn't. I stepped forward one pace. "That's enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. It carried. The men turned fully toward me now, irritation clear on their faces. "And who are you supposed to be?" one asked. Before I could answer, my daughter turned her head toward the sound of my voice. Her shoulders dropped just a little. "Daddy?" she whispered. The word cut through the cabin, not dramatic, not shouted, but powerful. The men laughed again. "Oh," one of them said, "her dad's here." I didn't respond to them. I looked down at my daughter. She was shaking now, trying not to show it, trying to be brave. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said quietly. She nodded, biting her lip. Then I looked up at the two men. They still didn't know. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what authority really looked like. They didn't know that their laughter had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. They thought this was a game. They thought silence meant approval. They thought mocking a blind child in an airplane aisle made them powerful. They had no idea that the laughter echoing through the cabin was about to stop everything. One of them puffed out his chest, not naturally, not confidently, artificially, like someone trying on authority the way a child tries on an adult's jacket, too big, too obvious, but worn with absolute belief. "HOA security," he said loudly. He said it for the cabin, for the phones, for the feeling it gave him. "We enforce standards." The words were rehearsed, practiced, the kind of line that sounds impressive if no one questions it. He leaned closer, too close. "You don't meet them." The sentence was delivered slowly, savoring each word. Not angry, not rushed, enjoyed. Phones were clearly recording now. Not hidden anymore, not subtle. People held them openly, hands steady, screens glowing. A few passengers exchanged looks, silent agreements that this needed to be documented, preserved, remembered. A man across the aisle clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. His jaw flexed, teeth grinding as he stared at the seat back in front of him, fighting the instinct to stand. A woman 2 rows back shook her head in disbelief, lips pressed tight, eyes glassy. She whispered to no one in particular, "This isn't right." The fake HOA cops ignored her. They were enjoying this. They were enjoying the way the cabin felt frozen, suspended between outrage and fear. They were enjoying the hesitation, the pause that happens when people are unsure whether they're allowed to intervene. Authority thrives in that pause. My daughter turned her face slightly toward the sound of the whisper. She couldn't see the aisle. She couldn't see the badges. She couldn't see the men looming over her, but she could feel the hostility. It pressed down on her like a weight, the way voices sharpen when they're meant to cut, the way laughter can feel like hands on your shoulders pushing you down. Her fingers slid along the handle of her cane, tracing it gently, grounding herself. She always does that when she's overwhelmed, touches something familiar, something real. Her voice shook. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. The question was small, soft, honest, and it hit the cabin harder than shouting ever could. For a brief moment, even the men seemed caught off guard. Not enough to stop, just enough to enjoy it more. One of them laughed under his breath. "That depends," he said. The other nodded, crossing his arms. "Depends how cooperative you are." My daughter swallowed. She tilted her head, trying to understand what cooperation meant in this context. She was sitting. She was quiet. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken unless spoken to. She searched for the right answer, the one that would make this stop. "I'm cooperating," she said carefully. "I'm sitting. I'm waiting." Her voice was steady now, but only because she was concentrating so hard to keep it that way. The men exchanged a glance. A shared look, the look of people who know they're being watched and enjoy it. "That's not enough," one said. "Not for standards," the other added. He reached down and tapped the fake badge clipped to his belt. The metal clinked softly, deliberately. Click, click, click. The sound echoed more than it should have. A reminder or an attempt at one. A few passengers flinched at the noise. The flight attendant finally stepped closer, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, "I need you to return to your seats." One of the men turned toward her slowly, like he was offended by the interruption. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "We're handling it." The flight attendant hesitated, only for a second. But the men noticed. "They always do. See?" one of them said, gesturing broadly at the cabin. "No problem." "Here." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "It is a problem." Another voice answered quietly, "I know." But no one stood. Not yet. My daughter shifted slightly in her seat, just a few inches. The cane moved across her lap with a soft scrape. One of the men snapped his fingers. "Don't move." The command was sharp, instant. My daughter froze. Her entire body went still, like a switch had been flipped. Years of learned caution kicked in, the understanding that sudden movements can make things worse. "I'm sorry," she said. The word slipped out automatically, not because she believed she'd done something wrong, because she'd learned that apologizing sometimes buys safety. The men smiled. There it was. "Submission. That's better," one said. The other leaned down again, lowering his voice. "People like you need to know where they belong." The sentence was quiet enough that it felt almost intimate. Private cruelty delivered in public. The cabin air felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. A man near the window finally spoke, his voice tight. "You're crossing a line." The fake HOA cop straightened slowly and turned to face him. "Oh," he said, "and what line is that?" The man swallowed. His courage wavered. The moment passed. The men turned back to my daughter, victorious. So one of them said, "Here's what's going to happen." My daughter listened intently. She always listens. "You're going to stay quiet," he continued. "You're going to stay still, and you're going to be grateful we're letting you stay." Her chin trembled. She nodded once. "Yes," she whispered. The cabin reacted, not with sound, with tension, with anger that had nowhere to go yet. A woman wiped her eyes. A teenager stared openly now, disgust written across his face. Someone else muttered, "This is abuse." Phones kept recording. The men noticed again. They didn't stop. They aimed into it. "You see this?" one said loudly, gesturing around the cabin. "Accountability." My daughter's hands tightened around her cane again. Her breathing grew shallow. She was doing everything right, everything she had been taught, and still it wasn't enough. I stood then, not fast, not dramatic. I unbuckled my seatbelt and rose into the aisle, movements controlled, deliberate. The men didn't notice immediately, too focused on their performance. When they did, irritation flashed across their faces. "Sit down," one snapped. I didn't. I took one step forward. "That's enough," I said. My voice wasn't raised, but it carried. The cabin felt like it leaned toward the sound. The men turned fully toward me now. "And who are you supposed to be?" one asked, smirking. Before I could answer, my daughter turned her head toward my voice. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "Daddy?" she whispered. The word landed gently, powerfully. The men laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. "Oh," one said, "her dad's here." I didn't respond to them. I looked down at my daughter. She was trying to be brave, trying not to cry, trying not to take up space. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said quietly. She nodded. Then I looked back at the men. They still thought this was pretend authority. They still thought volume and posture made them powerful. They still didn't understand that pretending to have authority while humiliating a blind child in a cabin full of witnesses was the worst mistake they could have made, because real authority was about to arrive, and it wasn't pretending. The intercom clicked softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. Just a gentle sound, easy to miss if you weren't listening. Then the cockpit door opened, not fast, not dramatic, controlled, the kind of movement that comes from someone who is never rushed because he doesn't neigh. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a pilot's uniform. He wasn't wearing a flight attendant's vest. He wore a dark jacket, tailored, clean, simple, the kind of clothing that doesn't ask for attention, but always gets it. He didn't scan the cabin. He didn't look confused. His eyes were sharp, focused. He knew exactly where he was going. He walked past the flight attendant, who straightened instantly when she saw him. Not because she recognized him, but because something about him made her do it without thinking. Passengers felt it too. The shift, that subtle change in pressure when someone important enters a room and doesn't announce it. The fake HOA cops noticed him last. They were too busy enjoying themselves. The man didn't look at them first. He went straight to my daughter. He knelt slightly so his voice would meet her at eye level. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "are you okay?" His tone was calm, warm, protective, not rehearsed, real. My daughter turned her face toward the sound of his voice. She tilted her head, listening carefully, the way she always does when she meets someone new. She nodded slowly. "They were laughing at me," she said quietly. "They said I don't belong here." Her words were simple. No exaggeration, no drama, just truth. The man's jaw tightened just a little, not enough for most people to notice, but enough. He stood up and the air changed. Not suddenly, not violently. It settled, like a door closing behind you without a sound, and you realizing too late that it's locked. He turned toward the two men in the aisle. "What are your names?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't confrontational. It didn't need to be. The fake HOA cops exchanged a look. A smirk appeared on one of their faces. "Why?" he said. "You with the airline?" A few passengers leaned forward slightly. The man smiled once, not a friendly smile, not a cruel one, a measured smile. "Yes," he said, "in a way." The smile disappeared. "Step back from the child," he added calmly. One of the men scoffed. "Or what?" he asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked past them, toward the flight attendant. "Please contact the captain," he said politely, "and corporate operations." The flight attendant didn't hesitate this time. "Yes, sir," she said, already turning. That word, "sir," hung in the air. The fake HOA cops straightened. "You don't get to order people around," one snapped. "We're enforcing standards." The man turned back to them. "You are impersonating authority," he said evenly, "and harassing a disabled minor." The cabin went silent. Phones didn't lower. They moved closer, zoomed in. "Watch your mouth," one of the men warned. "You don't know who you're talking to." The man nodded slightly. "You're right," he said, "but you're about to—" The captain emerged from the cockpit moments later. Uniform crisp, posture sharp. His eyes went straight to the man standing near my daughter. Recognition hit instantly. "Sir," the captain said, Respectful, immediate, passengers noticed. So did the fake HOA cops. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, suddenly uncertain. The man didn't look at him. He spoke to the captain. "These two individuals are impersonating law enforcement," he said calmly. "They've been verbally abusing my daughter, and the entire interaction is on camera." The captain nodded once. "Understood," he said. The fake badges suddenly looked ridiculous. Cheap, plastic. "You can't just," one of the men started. The man raised a hand. "Not sharply, just enough. I oversee regulatory compliance for this airline," he said calmly, "and several others." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The men froze. "I also liaise directly with federal transportation authorities," he continued, "and I am responsible for decisions that ground fleets." Silence, thick, heavy. The man turned his attention back to the two men. "You will return to your seats," he said, "immediately." One of them laughed nervously. "You're bluffing." The man didn't respond. He simply looked at the captain. "Do not close the aircraft door," he said. "Security will be boarding." The captain didn't argue. "Yes, sir," he replied. That was when the fake HOA cops understood. Not fully, but enough. They stepped back. Just one step, then another. The confidence drained from their faces. One tried to recover. "We were just joking," he said weakly. "No harm done." The man looked at my daughter. She sat rigid in her seat, hands still wrapped around her cane, face pale, body tense. "Harm was done," he said quietly. He knelt beside her again. "You didn't do anything wrong," he told her gently. "Not one thing." Her shoulders dropped slightly. Relief, the kind that comes when an adult finally says what a child needs to hear. Security boarded before the engines ever started. Two officers, calm, professional. They didn't ask questions in the aisle. They already had video. They already had statements. They already had authority. The fake HOA cops were escorted toward the front of the plane. No laughter now, no jokes, no fake badges waving, just red faces and lowered eyes. As they passed my daughter, one of them tried to speak. She turned her face away. She didn't need to hear anything else from them. The man stood quietly beside her seat, protective, present. The cabin exhaled, not applause, not celebration, relief, because everyone had felt it. The moment when cruelty thought it could hide behind silence and failed. The plane remained at the gate. No one complained. No one checked the time, because something far more important than a schedule had just been corrected. And the men who thought mocking a blind child made them powerful had just learned the difference between pretending authority and standing in front of the real thing. The man turned to the flight attendant. His movement was unhurried, his voice steady. "Please contact corporate operations," he said calmly. And the captain, the flight attendant's eyes widened, not in fear, in recognition. "Yes, sir," she said immediately. She didn't question him, didn't ask for clarification, didn't hesitate. She turned and moved quickly toward the front of the cabin, already speaking into her headset. The fake HOA badges didn't look impressive anymore. They hadn't changed, but everything around them had. The smiles on the two men's faces faded slowly, like someone dimming a light one click at a time. The confidence they'd been wearing slipped off them, revealing confusion underneath. "What is this?" One of them scoffed, trying to recover. "You can't just—" "I can," the man said evenly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't interrupt. He simply continued speaking, as if the interruption hadn't mattered. "I am the legal authority overseeing this airline's operating license," he said. "And several others," the words landed softly, but they didn't need force. They carried weight. The cabin went silent, not the awkward silence of discomfort, the heavy silence of realization. Phones didn't lower. They moved closer, zoomed in. People weren't recording drama anymore. They were recording accountability. The two men stared at him. One blinked rapidly, the other swallowed. "You're lying," one said, but his voice lacked conviction. The man didn't respond. He didn't argue. He turned slightly, just enough for the cabin to hear him clearly. "You are impersonating law enforcement," he continued evenly. "You are harassing a disabled minor, and you are doing so on a federally regulated aircraft." The captain appeared at T. He fronted the cabin, uniform crisp, posture straight. He stopped the moment he saw the man standing near the girl. His expression shifted instantly. Recognition, respect. "Sir," the captain said, one word, clear, undeniable. The cabin felt it, so did the fake HOA cops. One of them laughed nervously. Okay, he said, raising his hand slightly. "This is being blown way out of proportion." No one laughed with him. The man turned to the captain. "Do not close the aircraft door," he said calmly. "Security will be boarding." The captain didn't argue. "Yes, sir," he replied immediately. The fake badges looked ridiculous now, plastic, cheap. The men shifted their weight from foot to foot. "This was just a joke," one said quickly. "No harm done." The man turned and looked at my daughter. She was still sitting rigid in her seat, her back straight, her hands locked around her cane, her face pale. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She was holding herself together the only way she knew how. "Harm was done," the man said quietly. He knelt beside her again, lowering himself to her level. "You didn't do anything wrong," he told her gently. "Not one thing." Her shoulders dropped just a little. Relief seeped in, the kind that doesn't erase fear, but loosens its grip. Security boarded before the aircraft door ever closed. 2 uniformed officers, calm, professional. They didn't shout, didn't rush. They already knew why they were there. The captain gestured toward the 2 men. "These individuals," he said, "are being removed." One of the fake HOA cops protested. "You can't do this," he snapped. "We paid for these seats." An officer looked at him calmly. "You are being escorted off this aircraft," he said, for impersonation, harassment, and interference. The other man's face went pale. "This isn't real," he muttered. "This can't be happening." It was happening. Phones captured everything. The walk down the aisle, the lowered heads, the fake badges unclipped and handed over. No applause, no cheers, just quiet satisfaction. As they passed my daughter's seat, one of the men opened his mouth. She turned her face away. She didn't need to hear anything else from them. The man stood beside her seat until they were gone. Protective, present, the aircraft remained at the gate. No one complained. No one asked how long it would take, because something far more important than a schedule had just been corrected. The man spoke quietly to the captain. There was no argument, no pushback, just understanding. The captain nodded. "Yes, sir," he said again. The flight attendant returned to her position, visibly relieved. My daughter shifted slightly. The cane still rested across her lap. She touched it gently. Then she spoke. "Are they gone?" she asked softly. "Yes," the man said, "they're gone." She nodded. A breath she'd been holding finally escaped. The cabin felt lighter, not joyful, right. The man straightened and addressed the cabin briefly. "Thank you for your patience," he said calmly, "and thank you to those who recorded. That was all. No speech, no lecture. Authority doesn't explain itself. The plane would take off later, on time or not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that 2 men who thought cruelty was power had learned the truth. Power doesn't come from badges you buy. It doesn't come from volume. It doesn't come from targeting someone who can't fight back. Real power arrives quietly. It asks questions. It listens, and when necessary, it ends things. The flight was delayed. No announcement explained why in detail. No apologies were rushed out. No one demanded answers. The plane simply stayed where it was, and for once, no one complained. The engines remained quiet. The cabin lights stayed soft. The aisle, once CR, outed with cruelty, was empty. Security escorted the fake HOA cops off the plane, not dramatically, not roughly, firm, professional. No laughter now, no jokes, no smug smiles. The fake badges were gone, unclipped, collected, bagged like evidence. As they passed through the cabin, their eyes stayed low. They didn't look at passengers. They didn't look at phones. They didn't look at the child they had mocked. They were escorted out through the front door, and then they were gone. The door closed behind them. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. The cabin exhaled, not in celebration, not in relief alone, in understanding, because everyone knew what had just happened mattered. My daughter sat quietly again, in the same seat, in the same place. Her white cane rested across her lap, exactly where it had been before any of this started. Her hands were folded over it gently, not gripping it now, not clinging to it, just resting. Her shoulders were still tense, but no longer rigid. The fear that had locked her body into stillness had loosened its grip. She tilted her head slightly, listening. She listens for safety. The sounds were different now. No mocking laughter, no harsh voices, no footsteps hovering too close. Just the low murmur of passengers. The hum of the cabin, the familiar clicks and soft movements that told her the world had returned to normal. I knelt beside her seat, slowly, so I wouldn't startle her. She turned her face toward the sound of me. "Hey," I said softly. She nodded. I could see the exhaustion in her face now that the danger had passed. The kind that settles in after adrenaline fades, after your body realizes it can stop bracing for impact. "Did you do anything wrong?" I asked. The question wasn't rhetorical. It mattered. Because children like her learn early that adults don't always tell the truth, that authority doesn't always mean fairness, that sometimes blame lands on the quiet ones. She thought for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. Her voice was small, but certain. "That's right," I said gently. "You didn't." She nodded again, as if storing the answer somewhere safe. Around us, passengers pretended to return to normal. Some picked up books, some adjusted headphones, some stared out windows, but the energy was different. People were careful now, respectful. A woman across the aisle leaned over slightly. "You were very brave," she said quietly to my daughter. My daughter paused, then nodded once. "Thank you," she said. The flight attendant returned to the aisle. Her posture was relaxed now, her shoulders no longer tight with hesitation. She spoke gently over the intercom. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "We'll be departing shortly." No one sighed. No one complained, because patience felt like the right response. When the plane finally began to move, it did so smoothly, slowly, as if even the aircraft itself understood that rushing wasn't appropriate right now. The engines came to life. The sound was familiar, comforting. My daughter's fingers traced the handle of her cane again, absent-minded, grounding herself in something known. Then she leaned slightly toward me. "Are they really gone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "They're gone." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The plane lifted into the air, gently. The climb was smooth, steady, calm. Clouds passed the window. Light shifted. The world continued. My daughter sat back in her seat, the tension draining from her body inch by inch. Her head tilted toward the window, not to look, but to feel the warmth of the sun through the GL. "Ass." She was quiet, but not afraid. The men who thought mocking a blind child made them powerful learned something permanent that day. They learned that silence does not mean consent. They learned that fake authority collapses the moment it is challenged by truth. They learned that humiliating someone who cannot fight back does not make you strong. It exposes you. They learned that airplanes have cameras, that passengers have phones, that witnesses exist. They learned that there are people listening, even when you think no one cares. People watching, even when you believe no one will intervene. And they learned, too late, that you never know whose child you are hurting. Not when you make a joke, not when you wave a fake badge, not when you decide cruelty is entertainment, because sometimes the child you mock at 30,000 feet is protected by forces you can't see. Sometimes the quiet man in the aisle is the one who can ground your world with a single phone call. Sometimes accountability arrives without yelling, without threats, without spectacle. It arrives calmly, and it stays. The plane flew on. My daughter rested her hands on her cane and closed her eyes, not to hide, not to escape, but to rest, safe, seen, and never invisible again.